Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Privacy Snapshot. I'm excited that Lindsey Schultz from Visa is here to join us. She currently acts as Privacy Counsel. She's been an attorney for over 10 years, and before joining Visa, she was at Western Union. And in her organization, much like many of you listening, they're starting to think about how they're going to implement many of the changes that will be required under the amendments to California's Consumer Privacy Act. The new acronym is CPRA, California Privacy Rights Act, which, if you've been following, you know, is much more aligned with the GDPR, very comprehensive privacy compliance program. So one thing I know Lindsey's very passionate about is the customer journey in her organization. Where is data coming from, customer data coming from? How is it being used in the organization? Where is it flowing through? And so I know that's something you're thinking about as you think about preparing, you know, in the next 18 months to 2 years for full implementation of this new law, Lindsey. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about, you know, what's going through your mind right now when you think about the customer data journey.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa, and thanks so much for the opportunity. I hope everyone out there is doing well. So yeah, like Teresa said, I am very focused on making privacy easy to understand because I know a lot of people kind of freeze up when they hear the words data, personal information, and these new laws can be overwhelming. So in a product development cycle, you might think about the customer journey. So what I like to do is try to talk to people about the customer's data journey because that makes it more practical and easier to understand. And what I like to do from there is look at a big project of this nature in 3 big buckets. So the first is, what does your customer see and do when the customer is providing their personal information? What does your organization then do with that personal information internally? And then third, what kind of interaction are you having with vendors, clients, and other external organizations? Because if you can start thinking about that and start thinking about end to end, where is this PI going and what's happening with it, it helps you with a few things. One, in that front end, it helps you figure out how to be more transparent with everything that you're doing because you're able to think about these categories where the person's information is and where it's going. And especially with CPRA, hopefully all of us have worked on CCPA already. But CPRA did have one very important clarification for those of us interacting online, which is pretty much everybody, which is around a do not share concept, which kind of closed a gap relating to digital advertising. So really, really that what is the customer doing is not only are they filling out a form, but what's happening on the website and how is their information possibly getting shared. So when you're thinking about that part, you're thinking about what are you telling them in your notice? What are you collecting? And then are you having to figure out how you're sharing that information? Hopefully you have some ideas about good disclosures for that. Internally, then you're then thinking about what do I need to do to boost or create a new access process? Hopefully you have that solid already because of CCPA, but if you don't, I mean, I think everyone's always refining these things. This is probably the most difficult part of any privacy project, especially if you didn't already have to work on GDPR. So once that person's data is in your environment, how are you accessing it? How are you working with IT to make sure you can query it? And then you are, for CPRA, adding on the right of correction. There are lots of ways to do this. Maybe you have an online account and it's very easy. They just update their information. Maybe it's not so easy. So, you know, think about those things, think about those internal processes. And then the third big bucket is really what kind of external interactions are you having? CPRA did come in line with GDPR, but it was a little bit hard to catch in that there was a more affirmative obligation to update your contracts and monitor all of your sub-processors, which if you are used to GDPR, you hopefully were already doing that. If you're not used to GDPR, you need to get a little bit more diligent on how your processes are being supported by third parties and if that PI is being sent to third parties. And for data subject rights, that would include a ability to make sure that you are getting information from those vendors that you could deliver to a person through an access request if necessary. So if you bucket it into those three things, that's really, I mean, it's not easy. Privacy projects are never easy, but it does help break it down for business people in particular to try to think more strategically and not get so overwhelmed by this concept of data privacy and personal information. So those are my big high-level tips.
I think that's great. And having observed hundreds of companies now, sometimes working internally and now supporting companies externally, the extent to which we can align with existing business process, the language of a business, integrate into what the business is already doing, really can be that one thing that can make all the difference in terms of implementation and ongoing maintenance of all the policies and procedures that we're going to have to put into place. I'm going to ask you one question before we sign off here. So when you think about all the work that you've done, previous organizations now, I mean, there's so many ways to go about this. And for myself, I've been in this a long time. We did these things manually. We worked with spreadsheets and Word documents. Now there's all kinds of tools out there. And without getting really specific, is there, when you think about success that you've had in any area of the program in this way, is there a point at which automation made sense? Or, you know, what tip might you provide in that respect?
I think in the ideal world, with the access requests, you figure out how to have an automated query that you can run every time you get one. Based on my experiences, is much easier said than done. But especially if you're in a consumer-facing organization and you expect a high volume of these things, prioritizing how to automate that, I think above all else, probably is critical. In terms of privacy governance, certainly the more information you have, the more you're going to want to look at using a software to keep track of everything. But yeah, first and foremost, if we're talking about automation, trying to have a query that you can run for your access requests, I think would be top of mind.
I think that's what I'm seeing consistently over time too. If there's one area that you want to look at automation, it might be around that area. So thank you. I think that's an excellent tip, if you will, the customer data journey, kind of picking off of language that is familiar in the product development cycle, adapting it to think about these privacy pieces. So thank you, Lindsey, for joining us.
Yes.
Until the
My
next
pleasure.
time.
All right. Thank you.